readers, it's Heidi from Bunbury and the Stacks. I'm here to do my June rewind post. The last few months I've been finding it really difficult to review all the books I've been reading. I've been maybe getting one review written for every 3 or 4 books I read. I just haven't been able to find the time, and quite frankly I'd rather spend my free time reading than writing for the most part. And so I have been talking about the books I've read for the month in a rewind post, and this month it comes to you in a vlog format. The Daughter Star by Susan J. Bigelow. This was my first ever foray into space opera. Totally new genre for me, not entirely my thing, but it definitely made me curious and made me want to explore the genre a bit more. She does these great plots that have these LGBT undertones that are really subtle. She has this great recognition of the way people and relationships change over time that I think a lot of books aren't willing to acknowledge. She doesn't necessarily go for the happily ever after. Instead, she goes for a more real take on people, and that's what I like about it. Tuesday by Neil Gaiman, a kid's book, I realize. I'm just going to read you guys the first page. When Chu sneezed, bad things happened. Retribution Clause, surprisingly difficult to say, by Alana Andrews in the Hex Appeal anthology. This was a short story, takes place in the Kate Daniels universe. I do have a Salute Your Shorts post up for this one. Really enjoyed it. The audiobook for Gulliver's Travels, narrated by David Hyde Pierce. I was familiar with a lot of the story of Gulliver's Travels from watching adaptations of it, but had never actually read the book. I was hoping to find a lot of that same political satire and social commentary as I did in A Modest Proposal. I felt like I didn't get that until the 4th part of the book, The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. This was quite possibly one of my favorite books I've read so far this year. It's likely to make my top 10 at the end of the year. If you remember, I did not love The Raven Boys. I had a lot of reservations about some of the choices Maggie was making, where she might be going with them. I was leery about the whole Glendower plot. I found it kind of hard to buy. But in book 2, completely erased all of that. She handled the relationship changes and dynamics so adeptly that I hardly noticed how my own feelings were changing. She focused the plot, instead of on the search for Glendower, on Ronan, who I adore. Definitely should be looking forward to this one if you're not already. If you haven't picked up The Raven Boys yet, you should. Mortal Fire by Elizabeth Knox. I did end up giving up on this one about 300 pages in. I was really enjoying the magical structure, was so unique. I enjoyed the world building, but the pacing was really slow, and then the relationship dynamics that arose just came out of nowhere for me. It was insta-love and one of those creepy relationships that the person is somewhat ageless, and it's a 16, 17-year-old girl, and that always makes me a little uncomfortable. The older I get, the more uncomfortable it makes me. So I put this one aside. It just wasn't for me, but it's definitely going to work for a lot of readers. Anti-Goddess by Kendare Blake. I was really looking forward to this one. I really liked Anna Dressed in Blood, even though the audio was not good, honestly. I liked but didn't love Girl of Nightmares. This Anti-Goddess, I flipping adored. I will be posting about this one in September for Classics Retold. I'm covering retellings of the Odyssey, and I had no idea how perfectly this book would fit in. The Book of Lost Things by John Connolly, narrated by Stephen Crossley. I listened to this one on audio. It was our Yackers Book Club pick for the month. We resoundingly loved this book. I'm sure you will see our yak about it here shortly. Beau at Ballard Creek by Kirkpatrick Hill. This was one I also reviewed. If you are a fan of the Little House books, you will most likely be a fan of this one. The Odyssey graphic novel by Gareth Hinds. As I said, I am doing the Odyssey for Classics Retold in September. Instead of rereading the epic poem, which I have read twice in my life, I decided to pick up some graphic novel adaptations. I've read 2 now. This is definitely the better of the 2. I read Alpha and Omega by Patricia Briggs, which is in the On the Prowl collection. It's the only story I read out of this collection. Alpha and Omega is a prequel novella to Patricia Briggs' Alpha and Omega series. I very much enjoyed it. It takes place in the same world as the Mercy Thompson series. I don't know if I'm going to like it quite as much as that series, but we'll have to see in upcoming books. This one's definitely more heavy on the romance angle of things and less on the action, though there's still plenty of that too. She has a good balance, and I really like the characters, so I'll definitely be checking out the next one. Call the Midwife by Jennifer Worth, narrated by Nicola Barber. I picked this one up on audio because I adore the show Call the Midwife. If you haven't seen it on PBS, I highly recommend you check it out. It's the best thing I've seen on TV in the past 2 years. I love it. It is so heartwarming, heart-wrenching. I cry every single episode because I'm happy, because I'm sad. It just tells the best stories. The narration for the audio was extremely well done. It was nominated for an Audie Award for solo female narration. I feel that was well deserved. Yellow Cake by Margot Lanigan. This is Margot Lanigan's most recent book. It is a short story anthology. She mostly writes short stories. She does have 2 novels, both of which I've read. The Brides of Roanoke Island was my favorite book of last year. Tender Morsels, I still don't know how I feel about it. I both hated and loved it, and therefore I ended up rating it like 3 stars because I didn't know what to think. This was my first foray into her short fiction. It definitely showed me that I think her stories work best that way. When I thought about it, I realized that The Brides of Roanoke Island really was kind of a short story collection too. All the stories just happened to intersect and work together to tell an overarching plot. Whereas in Tender Morsels, she didn't have that short story set up, and it didn't work as well for me, I think because her stories are so heavy and show the worst parts of humanity oftentimes, and just don't necessarily have a lot of hope. There's brief glimmers there. Her world building is beautiful, her mind is creative, but it just can become too much and you kind of drown in it when it's several hundred pages. But when you only have 10 to 30 pages, you just get completely engrossed in these tiny little snippets of worlds and lives that she's giving you, and I love it. Dial H by China Mieville. The art for this was by Mateus Santaluco. Dial H proved to me that my suspicions about my personal relationship with China Mieville are true. For me, I feel like he has these great concepts, and I don't think the execution works for me. Ravenflight by Juliette Marillier. This is the second book in the Shadowfell series. I will be reviewing this next week, so I won't say too much about it. I did enjoy it more than the first, though I'm still struggling with it. I finally put my finger on what drives me nuts, and I definitely did enjoy this one more than the first, and will still be sticking around for the last. The Monstermologist by Rick Yancey, narrated by Stephen Boyer. You guys, I freaking loved this book. Loved the audio for it. I know everyone else is out reading The Fifth Wave, but this is one of the series that was on my list of 4 series that are finishing up this year, and that means that I'm going to devour them. It's so worth the wait. The first one does work as a standalone. I don't think you need to read the other books in the series, but I can't imagine anyone not wanting to. It is very horrific. He does such a wonderful job of describing things in a way that makes me completely nauseous, and I love that. The narrator was amazing. If you are a fan of Nick Podell, who narrated the Chaos Walking trilogy, who narrates the Kingkiller Chronicles, the Stephen Boyer reminds me a lot of him. And obviously, that's a huge recommendation. Definitely check this one out on audio if you can. If you can't, check it out in print. It's one of my favorite reads of the year, bar none. The Floating Islands by Rachel Neuremeier. I did this one as a read-along with Kiratana at Ivy Bookbindings. We are both really busy, and so we did manage to get it read on schedule, but we didn't talk about it as in-depth as we usually like to. But needless to say, both of us really enjoyed this one. I've read 4 of her books now. This is definitely my favorite of the 4. There's dragons, there's a girl masquerading as a boy to enter a hidden magic school, there's flying, and of course, gorgeous floating islands. She has such wonderful grasp of politics. She just rides that line straight down the middle where people are people. They're not intrinsically good or bad. She recognizes the honor of both sides of a conflict, and I love that. The romance is so subtle, as always. I love that she always has romance, but you almost wouldn't notice it if you weren't looking for it, and I love that. So definitely recommend this one. Lastly, I am currently reading Second Chance Summer by Morgan Matson. It is my first contemporary of the year that I've kind of read by choice. I have read a couple contemporaries. Some were arcs. One was for Yakker's Book Club, so this is my first I've just picked up. I am going on a road trip in August with my boyfriend, so I decided it would be fun to read a book that takes place in each of the states we're going to visit, so this was my pick for Pennsylvania. It takes place in the Poconos, and it also works excellently as a summer book, of course. I probably will have finished it by the time this post goes up. I think, as far as I'm into it now, I'm going to say I think I'm going to really like it, but not love it. Contemporary's just not my thing, but this does have a very good balance between the light and fun that I look for in summer books, and also some serious undertones that give it some depth, and I really appreciate that. So that's it for me this month. Let me know what your favorite reads for June were and what you're looking forward to reading in July. In the meanwhile, happy reading.